Next, we will go to Ian Bushfield from BC Humanist Association. Thanks for joining us today. You have 5 minutes for presentation, 5 minutes for question, and you may begin as soon as you're ready to go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair and members of the committee, for your time this afternoon. I'll quickly introduce myself and our organization before walking you through our 3 recommendations for Budget 2026. My name's Ian Bushfield. I'm the Executive Director of the BC Humanist Association. Our organization was founded over 40 years ago to provide a community and a voice for the 52% of British Columbians who are humanists or non-religious. We promote progressive and secular values and challenge religious privilege. Our first recommendation is to end the statutory property tax exemptions for places of worship. Presently, municipalities are required by law to exempt a place of public worship from property taxes. We've estimated that for 2019, these statutory exempted amounted to almost $46 million in foregone revenue that had to be paid by homeowners and local businesses. Additional property owned by religious groups, for example, parking lots, thrift shops, or even vacant land, can also be exempted at council's discretion through a permissive exemption, costing an additional about $12.5 million. In other words, every British Columbian is required to indirectly tithe $12 to support local religious groups, disproportionately benefiting long-established Christian congregations who hold prime real estate. Were our organization so privileged as to own property in BC, there's no equivalent statutory exemption available to us, and we'd be on the hook for the full property taxes unless a local government were so generous as to grant us a permissive exemption as a charity, which are much less commonly granted. Given the tight fiscal constraints many municipalities operate under, we've seen an uptick in recent years of councils reevaluating their permissive tax exemption policies. For example, some have denied requests while others are capping the total amount of exemptions they are willing to grant. Given municipalities can already grant permissive exemptions for charities, we recommend removing the special statutory and permissive exemptions granted to places of public worship in the Vancouver and community charters. This would empower local communities to make these decisions directly and on equal footing with other secular organizations that provide benefits to their community. Our second recommendation is to phase out faith-based and elite private school funding. The province of BC contributes over $500 million annually to independent schools. We calculated that almost 70% of this funding goes to faith-based schools, almost all of which are Christian. And while it's true that some secular independent schools provide educational opportunities for students with special needs, they receive the smallest portion of this funding, with even elite secular schools receiving more funding. Taken together, private school subsidies segregate our society along religious and class lines. We have documented publicly funded private schools that exclude 2S LGBTQ students and staff, as well as schools that teach creationism as science. Amid growing concerns about anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homophobia, transphobia, and other hate, as well as to try to ensure British Columbia remains economically competitive, we recommend no longer supporting this two-tiered education system. Polls overwhelmingly show British Columbians do not support public funding going to private religious schools. It's only a small, ideologically motivated lobby that pushes this myth of school choice to deprive our public system of much-needed resources. Our final recommendation is much more broad. It's to just generally ensure that government spending goes to secular and inclusive programming. Canada is no longer a Christian nation, if it ever were one. Instead, this is a vibrant multicultural democracy where the Charter requires the government maintain religious neutrality. However, that duty is undermined when government partners with faith-based nonprofits to provide social services. The most egregious example is the $1 billion in public funding that goes annually to Catholic health care providers in this province that refuse to provide care even when it violates the orthodoxy of the bishops and nuns who are in charge of those facilities, namely abortion, contraceptives, and medical assistance in dying. Similarly, when it was elected, this government admirably committed to universal $10 a day childcare by 2027, but we have seen public funding going to evangelical daycare such as Kamloops Christian School and Christian Life Children's Center, meaning public funds are subsidizing religion and religious education directly. The same story is true for affordable housing projects and addiction treatment programs, where some of our most vulnerable neighbors are at risk of publicly subsidized religious coercion. We need strict rules to ensure that public money does not go to organizations that proselytize or discriminate on protected grounds. And with that, I'll happily hear your questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Going to questions by members. Recognizing MLA Blatherwick.
Thank you so much. So that was fast. I think you were our fastest presenter that we've had so far. And could you just go back to point 2? What were you estimating that the credits that go to private schools amount to?
It's about $500 million annually. It goes up a little bit each year. So there's two tiers of private schools, independent schools in BC. There's phase one that receive 50% of the funding of a neighboring public school. Those schools have to operate at or below the cost of a public school. Almost all of those are religious, but there are some that serve special needs. The group two private schools, independent schools, those can operate at or above the cost of public schools, and they get a 35% subsidy. And those are your elite schools, the kind of high prep schools and stuff. There are other private schools that get no funding, but there's very few of them relatively.
Thank you so much. And so sorry, with your first point, you are not directly advocating again for like a budget expenditure. You're advocating for like a revenue generating measure in terms of like through the municipalities, for the municipalities, not for the province necessarily.
Yeah, there's a small amount of property taxes that goes to the province. For example, through the school tax and rural area taxes. This change wouldn't necessarily affect a dollar amount, but it would change the who pays question, depending how it was assorted. Because the way most municipalities set their property taxes is they decide how much money they need and then divide that among the ratepayers, right? So the same amount of money would be collected, it would just be burdened differently.
That's a good point. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Recognizing MLA Tepper.
Yeah, hi. I noticed you just, it was predominantly Christian schools you were talking about. My riding does not have any. It has Sikh schools, Khalsa schools. Does that fall into the same category?
Yep. Yeah, we broke down all of the independent schools we could identify in British Columbia. We've gone through every website and kind of categorized them. And when we did that, most of them are Catholic or kind of vague Christian. They don't specify a denomination, but they're maybe evangelical or just Protestant. But there are a small number of Sikh, there's a couple Jewish and Muslim schools as well.
Excellent. Okay, and the funding shortfall for, well, not a short, in speaking with Surrey School Board, they were saying basically at this point with the funding that they have, if the private schools were not there and weren't getting money from outside sources to deal with that, the school system would probably just basically collapse with the shortfall because of the amount of money they save by having private schools. Is that something you're concerned about, we need to deal with? How would we deal with that?
Can you just explain the argument a little bit clearer so I understand the question?
Basically, the property taxes are paying for a certain number of students. You use 35% for the schools getting funding. The rest is coming from either religious organizations or the parents of the children. So what would we be able to do with those kids if we were pushing them out of the private schools back into a public system was that a 65% shortfall?
My understanding is BC's private school enrollment is about average for Canada, but BC is only one of a couple provinces that actually subsidize private schools. There are more kids that attend private schools in Ontario where they don't get a subsidy than there are in BC. So I don't believe the evidence is strong that cutting off the subsidy would necessarily mean there's a rush of all of these students back to the public system, because people choose private schooling for many different reasons, because it's important to their faith or it's a matter of personal preference. So I'm not convinced that eliminating this subsidy would result in a tidal wave to fund in the public system.
Okay, so you're okay with the schools, just not the funding?
I think the schools need a close eye on regulation, but I don't think we should be funding them. I'm not advocating closing the schools.
Okay.
Okay, recognizing MLA Morissette.
Yeah, just quickly, to my knowledge, municipalities do have the choice to offer a tax exemption to churches, etc. I don't know that there's any need for anything there.
The place of public worship is explicitly exempted from property taxes in the Community Charter and the Vancouver Charter. It's additional lands that they can exercise discretion over.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I apologize if I talk too fast in my speech, but thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you so much for your presentation.